Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Senior Fellow at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business owning families. Today's conversation represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay Hughes and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured David C. Wells Jr. He's the president of Gray Court and Company. The firm has nearly 24 billion in assets under advisement. We talked about his book, When Anything is Possible. If you missed that interview, feel free to check it out on our YouTube channel. Today, I am joined by John Langston. John is founder of Republic Capital Group, an industry-leading wealth and asset management investment banking firm. They also work with middle market businesses to transact and to find them new homes, whether that's selling a piece or selling them all. Since its founding in 2015, they've transacted more than 150 billion of client assets in 2022 and 2023 alone. John's the author of 24% More. John and his wife Candace are heavily invested in the future of the wealth management business and are the namesakes of the Langston Wealth Management Center at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas. John, thank you so much for making time for us on Authors at Drucker.
And Dave, thanks very much, Dave, for the opportunity. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks to everyone for joining.
So, John, I really enjoyed your book. You gave a unique look at not only what you do professionally, but a view into your personal life a little bit as well in the journey. You've worn a lot of hats, and to me, it's your resilience and determination to succeed that maybe stands out the most. Is this something you feel like that was developed as a kid, or like how did this come about? How'd you become so gritty and determined?
Well, that's a great question. I would always start, of course, with my parents and sort of the values they instilled in us. We were not, my parents were involved in the nonprofit world and serving other people. And as I look back, their deep commitment to try to be helpful to people, and yet they did not have significant resources. The only way to try to navigate that gap is through a lot of effort, determination, being resourceful, being resilient. And so I think watching that was a big part of it. I really loved to play basketball growing up in a competitive sense. And I think, it's the type of sport that changes quickly. We've all seen one team is winning and at the last second another makes the shot. So it sort of in me developed this thought that you need to remain vigilant. And even though the last play didn't go well, you're very quickly going to get another opportunity to do something. So I think it's those types of things. And then, just being focused and believing that the things you do matter and positively impact people make it easier for me not to give up, because I feel that, the successes will be good for them. And so that's motivating.
Well, I'm glad you've chosen to spend time specifically around students to influence them and encourage them, because too many students see the end product of someone that has become successful, but they don't get to see or hear about the road or the journey, and they can become discouraged along the way. And so I'm really grateful that you've chosen to invest in kind of sharing your story with those students, and also investing financially in them so they can pursue some of their goals. So appreciate that. John, you may know this, but we have a mix of attendees that listen to Authors at Drucker. And I'd love to get your advice for a couple different groups that are showing up to this call. The first group of listeners are multi-generational family businesses. As you think of investment banking and the process you facilitate with this group in particular, what are some of the key elements they should consider when determining what to do with their company?
Yeah, something I think about a lot and observe a lot is that because our world is awash in data and awash in opinions and advice, that sometimes in the process of thinking about, or what I would refer to as maybe just exploring mentally, possible scenarios, people become not only maybe not confused, but just there are often differing opinions for the same question. And I think in life, this is one of the most challenging aspects when you can make an argument for either road, for either path. And so what I really encourage people to think about is the importance of very specific, very tailored advice to your specific situation. The most common thing I see is the misapplication of correct data to the wrong situation. And so someone is quite confident in their view because after all, this data was resourced from a very, credible group, but it's being misapplied. And frankly, it's one of the most common things I encounter. And what we think is a key part of how to think about what you might do is very specific, tailored advice. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's helpful to recognize that consultants, data providers often take a position where their job in their mind is to present you with the best approach because they need to package that advice to be able to distribute it widely. And my perspective is that because businesses and families and industries and situations are so unique, that there's a high probability that advice at best will be imperfect. And so that's how I think about it. Obviously, that leans very heavily into the work that we do. But I just have seen it be crucial for so many families, so many times. I've come to view almost in some cases, some of the data-centric pieces as not helpful in the beginning. We can certainly do validation as we go along, but we need a very specific strategy that's very thoughtful and very nuanced to produce the outcomes that the family wants.
Well, and John, my opinion is that the family or the business owner typically has the answer within them that they want to accomplish, but unless we ask hard enough questions, unless we're patient enough to guide that discovery process, I mean, you talk about it like it's coming to clarity, unless you're careful and thoughtful enough about helping them come to clarity, you may end up leading them down a road that they actually don't want to take because of data or some other reason.
Right.
So can you talk about maybe the process that you and your firm take to help a business owner come to the clarity they need?
Yeah, the thing I like to focus on and always encourage owners to think about is that the best decisions come out of a foundation of the factual situation at that present time, not what happened historically, not what might happen in the future, not if certain things happen if. And so we've been very successful in part. I've had a number of clients say to me, well, do you know why we picked you in a Republic? And I would say, well, I'd love to hear your perspective. And the answer was that we were willing to take on an assignment and a project to work with them when they weren't completely clear about the end target. A simple analogy would be they weren't certain if they wanted to transact all of the business or part of it, have a minority investor. I have always felt like that is where we could add the most value. And there's certainly an argument that says, well, before you go out and do some work, have a good idea what you want to accomplish. But I'll tell you, the reality is until you have very specific, credible information on the table in writing, things are not very clear. And I have watched over and over families go through the process of that specific question. That's the easiest one to explain or convey. Hey, should we translate all the business or part? We've walked through the process, we've dialogued, we've worked on the information, we've had conversations with the market, and it's become crystal clear what they want, what would be important to them, and what life would look like. And then, of course, in terms of with market engagement and generating specific input about written valuations, et cetera, on the business from the marketplace, all the ambiguity goes away. And you could even talk about what scenarios look like. And I've found that the lack of subjectivity, just in terms of who are we talking about, what are we talking about, tends to free the mind to focus even more on what is it I want. I think there's a cloud in the beginning. It's almost like walking into a restaurant and someone saying, well, what would you like to eat? The first thing you do is ask for a menu. Well, the bottom line is a professional process, a thoughtful process that puts people first will help build that menu. And then ultimately you may decide not to order or not to have that meal. But until you get to that stage, it's very hard to know what you're drawn to. So I think that is how I would describe it. And again, the candid feedback I've gotten from some families, some company owners is other banks weren't willing to work with us until we told them exactly which path we wanted to take. And I can understand it, but I think it's a mistake for, a family or a company owned by a group of private partners.
My experience is that a business owner also experiences the greatest level of anxiety when there is ambiguity.
Yes.
When they don't know what their real options are, it can just be paralyzing for them, and truly it is anxious. What should
Yes.
I do? I mean, they're supposed to be operating their business, but yet they're thinking about these 7 alternatives that they don't even know if are real. So I'm glad you brought that up about kind of relieving some of that anxiety for the business owner by taking away the ambiguity and figuring out, okay, what is real? What does the market say is real? And does that align with what you personally and what your family wants to accomplish? Yeah, that's important.
Absolutely.
Um,
Well,
Go ahead.
no, the other thing I was going to say, you were kind of mentioning they're still operating their business. It takes something like 13 to 1400 hours to affect a transaction. Imagine if you're heavily involved in trying to manage the business as well and dealing with that without, a deep support from a team guiding you through a process. That's the other side of the coin is not only is there ambiguity, but sometimes when they're casting about on their own, they can barely have the time to really work with and manage a process correctly. So,
Well, you can just picture like someone collapsing dead at the finish line, having to try to operate their company and try to sell it. Trying to work, 2 full-time jobs to do it. Yeah, I can see how partnering and letting people take the major the lift off of the business owner would be powerful. Let's talk about a similar question, but to a different group. So the other group that is, probably half of the people that listen to this are advisors to family companies. As you think about the role of an advisor in this kind of crucial and also emotional journey of selling part or all the business, what advice would you offer them so they can be most helpful to business owner clients?
yeah, I think it's a great question. Just quickly, as a bridge to this, I'll explain the title behind the book of 24% More. There was research done on over 13,000 private company transactions going back the last 20 years. University of Alabama, Portland State, and then the Ultra High Net Worth Division of Northern Trust did these studies. And what they found is that on average, a private company that engaged a competent investment banker on average it was actually 25% more on their transaction value. I felt like that seemed not to be a research-based number, and I wanted to lower it, so I went with 24%. But that's the idea behind the book, is that there's a real accretion in value. The reason I led with that is a lot of our work at Republic is done in concert with other advisors. CPAs, lawyers, financial advisors, wealth managers call us or introduce clients to us. And I'm finding that process, and that's just growing tremendously for us, very gratifying. We in the financial world, whether it be from a tax perspective or investing perspective or all those things, we all get excited about 2, 3, 4% differences. We all know what a difference that can make. And I wrote the book because as I came across this research about the importance of an advisor on this part of your value, your wealth, I was blown away that it wasn't being talked about more. And obviously, again, it's the work we do. So, but it really validated what I saw in the marketplace. So my message to other advisors is, find someone you trust that will put your clients first, have a people first sort of mentality, a culture, a firm that's built on that, and collaborate with them. And of course, we have clients that we share with other advisors and that sort of thing. But as we look forward over the next 10 years, and I keep seeing different numbers, but they keep going higher. But the discussion is that there will be something like $20 trillion in private companies that will be transacted the next 10 years. There is within that a great opportunity for advisors to serve those companies, those families, those owners. And I think the more we all collaborate, it's very routine for us when we engage with a client to help them select counsel. Of course, it's their decision, but we try to guide them towards someone that is familiar with their situation, that we think would be a good fit, all the things you might expect. And of course, in some cases, they have counsel already, but we're highly involved in coordinating the advisors. We've seen tremendous value around that. We've even, for some very large firms that we've helped, we've gone out and sourced the legal and tax counsel for them because we knew we needed a certain expertise. And so my advice would be to find people to collaborate with in the transactional space, like ourselves or others. And I think you'll find a lot of value, in that. I'll also say it's often the case. The most common experience I have with owners of a private company is that almost always they underestimate the value. I guess I should say the market value. And oftentimes, valuations or appraisals or et cetera are done for tax purposes or other purposes.
Sure.
And they do not mirror the market value. We were tracking this going back a couple of years. And we were finding we were routinely exceeding the valuation by over 30% with the market transaction. And so I say all that to say, if you were doing tax planning or estate planning or other types of plannings that other advisors might be doing, it could be very helpful to have a market-based valuation on the business. And we do that, of course, for firms and do it in concert with other advisors. But I think the distinction would be we would be approaching it from a market-based valuation. Would provide that. We typically wouldn't be expecting them to go out and use that, for the IRS or other functions, but it's very helpful to understand that perhaps what you've been using for last year could be as much as 35% difference in terms of a market base. That might impact some decisions you might make.
Yeah. Well, if 24% or more is truly the number, then 2 to 4% for this kind of advice is probably not very expensive. But that's what I'm hearing. Let's zoom out a little bit. You talked a little bit about the next 5 to 10 years, but what are some of the biggest opportunities and also challenges you foresee in kind of the M&A space specific to family-owned businesses and those in the wealth management industry? What are some of the things you're seeing come down the pipe?
Yeah, look, I think we're obviously having a shift in demographics where many of the owners will be over the next 5 to 10 years into their middle or later 70s. Obviously, people are healthier than ever. I've been involved in some transactions and situations with people in their 80s, and I was shocked when I found out that was the case because their just level of energy, their sharpness mentally. At the same time, though, of course, that won't be true for everyone. And I think there were a lot of, I mean, candidly, a real story. I met with someone yesterday who leads a very powerful firm. And we were just talking about the timeline, but they've reached an advanced age. And it was interesting because they were talking in increments of 20 years. And I just felt statistically that was probably a 5% possibility. And I thought it was interesting, but part of it comes from a real passion and love for the work, which I, as someone who's built this firm, will be 10 years in September, completely understand. Love the work, love the clients. And the truth is, when you get to that level, yes, you're doing it for economics. You have, people you want to support, family to take care of, but you really love what you do and you love your clients. And so I think part of the challenge will be the succession. The next generation, this is not anything new that a lot of people are talking about this, but I would add a layer by saying, I think it's going to be interesting because there is so much private equity capital pursuing private businesses that I think you're going to see. I'm curious to see what happens to, the second generation or third or fourth that might transact out. Where will that capital go? How will it be used? I think being thoughtful about that is crucial. I also think that in some cases, private equity might play a useful role as a minority partner, where you could have an opportunity for the next generation to lead the business forward, but with more input, more strategy. And I think that while people sometimes talk about the friction associated with that, which can be real, I've dealt with a couple of, I was part of a couple of companies that were owned by, sort of top 5 PE firms in the world. And I mean, it's very simple. When you're doing well, it's amazing. When you're having challenges, it's not any fun. And it's funny, I had the 2 extreme experiences. In the one company, we were literally the best performing investment in the entire multi-billion-dollar fund, which was awesome. They brought us to the national conference. We got to stand and wave from the front row. In the other case, our firm was struggling. We had some revenue decline through some different issues and things that happened. And those are tougher quarterly meetings, like, what are we going to do? But having said all that, while the friction and quality of life can be impacted by a private equity partner, your odds of economic success go up meaningfully. You were dealing with people who have, by definition, a track record of success, because that's why they have assets to manage, frankly. If they raised the fund, there was enough look at their track record. So again, imperfect and certainly not a guarantee, but I think that could be leveraged on the opportunity side, whereas in some cases, the business otherwise might be sold completely if there wasn't additional support, guidance, for the business. But I think those are some of the things where we see on the horizon.
Another group that I think is really interesting are single family offices that
Yes.
are basically, they're private capital that are trying to figure out, how do they stay in front of the cash flow monster that is a growing beneficiary group?
Mm.
And what I've seen is that many of them don't feel like they can achieve that objective in the public markets. And so they are essentially becoming private equity firms, coming in and taking out, percentage of a very successful large family company. And it achieves two things. One, it like simplifies the ownership structure for the family, provides liquidity, but then allows that family office access to a business that otherwise they couldn't invest in because it's not publicly available.
Dave, you're exactly right. There is the rise of, family office capital. We see it. We've transacted with several. And frankly, there is at least a perception among owners that they would like to sell to this type of group, particularly in a minority construct. And I share the view and I share the affinity. I will say that I think the interesting dynamic is you may have a family that, let's say, they made their wealth in the steel industry, just to come up with one. But now they're deploying capital into another area. They may wind up to be outstanding investors there. But I think this idea that they have the capital because they did well investing in the past may not be as accurate. Does that make sense? In other words, my analogy about the private equity firm that went out to large institutions and raised this capital, in large part, it was because they showed, here's what we did in these sectors. Here's our track record. So I think you have attractive, thoughtful, and I'm personally biased, lean that way, pools of capital, but maybe investing in new areas. And that may require some thought, of course, by the family office and those who perhaps might be taking the investment to say, is there a value add here? How does that work? And again, the research is that family-owned companies do better. So at the end of the day, I'm biased that way, but I just think it's something to consider and think about.
Yeah. I want to go on a tangent a little bit. There's going to be some students, maybe at McCombs, maybe at the Drucker School, that are listening to this that aspire to become the next John Langston. What's the path in, and how does a student position themselves to you or your company as someone that can become valuable and find their way in the industry, because they can be very difficult to get started?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, I would tell them, be the next you, but hopefully you can pick up some smart things from Dave and myself in this call today. All kidding aside, there are many people to learn great things from. I would first say, make sure you understand your strengths. A key change in my life came about, and I'll reference a tool, there are others, but when I use something called StrengthsFinder, which essentially helps you identify, the core areas you're strongest in. The key for me was it really ingrained in me the idea that I should be spending my time on my strengths. Now, this seems obvious today. Who knows what I was thinking when I was younger? But I remember distinctly having this feeling that, boy, I need to improve in all these areas if I want to be successful. And I think of the analogy, it's, that you certainly don't want any of the weaknesses or challenges you have to sort of put your car in the ditch, if you will. Sure. But the reality is, spending your life as a younger person, you think you're being conscientious by trying to be better at all these things, I think is a mistake. I think the sooner you learn your strengths and figure out where you could fit, and this is something we do at Republic, right? Our whole philosophy is, if we find the right person, we're going to study and work with them on what they're good at, and we're going to put them there. I've got people in the firm that are just amazing at business development. It's like they just walk around and stumble into somebody and they're a great prospective client. And then I've got other people who are tremendous at what we call execution, managing the deal, keeping things organized and all that. Those are gifts that those two individuals I'm thinking about right now, they were born with those. And it was their job and our job to uncover those and then put them in that position. Now, I say all that to say one of the opportunities I think at a firm that is not, these are fantastic firms, but very large, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, that is a system you're going to plug into. If you go into a different environment, you have an opportunity perhaps for a firm to say, we're going to help you figure out what you're good at, and we're going to focus you there, right? Within a system. So I think learn your strengths, focus on that, manage your weaknesses, get help with them, use technology. If you have the resources, pay someone on the areas you're weak, and then spend as much time as you can doing what you're good at. And what you'll find is, obviously, you'll produce more results, and the research is you enjoy your work a lot more. And so it feels like just such a powerful combination. So that would be a big part of the advice I give. Look, we look for people, and I'll say this about investment banking in particular. It's true that it can be particularly stressful. You might work on a transaction for months and then it could fall apart and then you're back to square one. Managing that stress can be challenging for some people. There are also environments that are driven by what I would call fear and anxiety. I absolutely detest that philosophy. I think fear and anxiety are one of the worst forces on earth. They lead to all kinds of negativity. I'm not talking about caution. I mean, I'm a wear my seatbelt every time kind of guy, but that's caution is different than fear and anxiety. But, some of the firms you might go into, and I've worked in at least one of these in my career, it's all about, you're afraid to make a misstep or do something wrong. You might get called out or fired or just this huge anxiety, right?
Yeah.
I look for people who are conscientious, but not anxious. And what I mean by that is I want a young person who's thoughtful. They try to be on time. They try to do all the things you would expect, but it's coming from an internal attitude of conscientiousness. I want to do a good job. I'm part of this team. I care about my teammates. I care about my work. I respect myself. Not the person that's like, oh my God, I'm going to be fired. I'm going to be called out. That anxiety comes in and infects the culture, right? So I don't know if that's helpful to somebody, but try to be conscientious, not anxious, and look for a culture that'll let you focus on your strengths.
Yeah, no, I think it's great advice. Just want to take a pause for our listeners here. Towards the end, we're going to open it up for questions. So if you have any questions for John, you can feel free to start submitting those in the chat. So I want to talk about, maybe expectations business owners should have in terms of process for selling their business. In the book, you talk about kind of your proprietary roadmap that clients should expect. What are some of the things maybe that they aren't aware of or aren't necessarily prepared for? And what can you tell us about that roadmap?
Yeah, look, I would say a couple things. So we were talking about private equity earlier. One of the most common mistakes I see is that a business owner will get outreach from a potential buyer, private equity group, et cetera. And they say, well, I might as well just entertain the conversation a little bit, hear what they have to say. And they chat a little bit and then they ask for financials. They send financials over. And essentially what's happened in that moment is you have taken away your opportunity for a first impression that was planned, curated. The financials were reviewed. They were prepared in a particular way, all for your benefit, right? In terms of enhancing the value. And so what I would say, what would someone expect with us? This is not the best analogy, but the reality is, if you think about, take some people back, the movie Miss Congeniality, right? If you don't know this movie, it was, do I have it right, Julie? Well, no, it was
Sandra Bullock.
Thank you. I started to say the wrong actress, Sandra Bullock. Beginning of the movie, she's a police officer, an FBI agent going undercover in this beauty pageant, and she works with a bunch of guys. She's very masculine. By the end of the movie, right, they've got her as a contestant, and they have just totally beautified her, right? That's what we try to do with your company, right? Your everyday company showing up in your jeans or, your regular clothes. We look at your financials, everything the presentation of the company, all of that we're polishing up. Now, to be clear, in the movie, she was already pretty, but they just took it to the next level. And so we're doing that with your financials, the projections, and we're very adamant about what we do being ethical and professional. So it's not a smoke and mirrors game, but there's no question by the end of that movie, they had her much prettier. And so the reality is you want people to meet you when you're at the end of engaging with us. So someone would hire us. We would, go through financials, prepare the story, or figure out what your goals are. And what I always tell people you need to realize that's different about going through a professional investment banking process is you aren't chasing anyone. We create the environment where they're chasing you. And that's a big difference. We construct it to where it's important that they meet certain deadlines. You don't have to meet their deadlines. And so it really changes the dynamic. And from our standpoint, we're huge believers in being deeply involved in every aspect of the process. It's typical for us to be on every call with an accountant. It's typical to be on every call with a lawyer. And you would be surprised in these transactions how often we have to craft a business solution to a tax or legal issue that the two sides can't agree on. It's very common for both the counsels to be arguing over a particular point, and then they're at an impasse. And we say, well, look, instead of fighting over this point, what if we do it this way? And we just try to propose a business solution. That has gotten more things over the finish line than I can even count, the last many years. So those are the types of things you should expect. I guess also, you want to work with someone that is very much feels they're in partnership with you, which is basically the philosophy of, we actually call it extreme partnership. And the idea is that we will do whatever it takes within the bounds of ethics and legality and morality to help you succeed. We once flew someone to another city because the company's controller had unexpectedly passed away. So we flew someone in to go in because they didn't know how to work the software, it's a long story, and someone to pull out their data and put it all together, right? Just whatever it's going to take. And lots of stories like that to help people be successful. So those are the types of things we try to do, Dave.
Well, I think, again, specifically looking in the family business framework, family businesses are not always run through the lens of being sold. And so I can see that you would sit down with them and look at just even how they pay each other, compensation and benefits and perks, and, is there a company plane and things like that, and things that you could do along the way to kind of clean things up that would make it more attractive to a buyer that, I think you have to do those things. But the question is, how much runway should a family give to be able to kind of square some of those things away so that it's meaningful enough time frame for the buyer to say, okay, this is real.
Yeah, what I would say, our job, and also let's always keep in mind that maybe the family's just going to sell 25% of the business. It's really a capital raise, right? So, but what we try to do in all of our communication with investors or buyers is present the end state that they'll be investing in. And that can look quite different from where the business is operating today. Obviously, and for what it's worth, I've done my own transaction, the minority transaction. So I've been through all this myself, and I think that's important. I've obviously been through it multiple times in my career for my own companies. And it's interesting. I've dealt with a lot of investment bankers. They've never done a single transaction of anything they've owned, right? So, which is fine, but it's just a different perspective. I'm sitting there at the table with you going, yeah, I remember when I was thinking that too. And let's talk about that, right? But we present the end state, which in my mind requires some creativity, some vision. And I think we do an excellent job of sort of creating that. And obviously we put it in a language that the investors understand, that they speak. And look, we've had companies, we had a case a couple of years ago where they had an existing valuation on the business. We came in and said, look, we could restructure this business. And it's a longer story how we did it. But 5 months later, we did a market-based transaction, a minority investment into the company that was 4 times a 5-month-old appraisal, right? 4 times. And that is possible. And it gets into things that you're talking about around cash flow and things like that. That's not typical, right? That's not normal. We certainly aren't promising that for everyone. And it was interesting because it was owned by 2 partners who've been close friends for many years. They said to me, the firm that does our valuations has been doing them for 5 years, and they're experts in our industry. Why have they not proposed this? And the best answer I could give is that they were in the business of providing you a valuation. They were not in the business of creating value. Our job is to create and find and uncover value. And certainly we do valuations, but at the end of the day, it's a completely different mindset when you look at a business and say, hey, you know what? and frankly, when we met with them, I didn't want to overpromise or scare them. So I told them it would be like 2 times their recent valuation, just because I thought if I say 4 times, they're never going to believe that. But at any rate, I think it's a different mindset that you want to try to bring to the table. And I would say family-owned businesses are probably some of the best candidates for some of those enhancements of value, because
Yes.
things will be done different in the future.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Um, I mean, even something as simple as distribution policies, and if the distribution policy changes, that could really impact the valuation and how that goes. I'm going to ask one more question, then I want to open it up to our audience that's here live. I'm super curious about the non-financial complexities that business owners face, the emotional aspects of these transitions, and how do you help them prepare for those things? And yeah, what are you seeing? What are you seeing there? Are there any great resources for them to prepare for what it's going to feel like to part with their favorite child?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been through this many times, and what I would say is in the early stages, the ambiguity, the uncertainty, I think makes it hard for some people to pull out what they want. Of course, I meet clients who are like, hey, been thinking about this for 2 years. This is what I'm doing. Okay, great, let's do it. But what I've found is the sense of clarity, the actual options, the actual pathway. Because when you sit down and let's say there were, for example, the business is being sold, and to be clear, in many cases, people stay involved, for years after a transaction. That's certainly a factor too. But when you can sit and contemplate that and be looking on paper and have been in meetings with the actual partner you would have, that's completely different. I've had several clients at the beginning say, oh, like for example, this is a real example. Hey, listen, I want to sell the business and I'm going to be out in 12 months. And, I've enjoyed this, but it's great. I want to do all these things. We've gone through the process, found a great partner, and they come back and said, hey, this is so exciting. I want to stay involved.
It's like
I'm
new
good.
energy. New energy.
Yes. And by the way, new energy is the greatest outcome that I see, especially if someone doesn't completely leave. What I see is the business grows, the owners are excited and happy. And the thing I try to tell owners too is trust your instinct at some level. If you've built a successful business, it's likely you've made several good decisions along the way. If you're feeling like you should at least explore your options, I heartily encourage you to do it. And I don't know if you have a sixth sense. I don't know if you have some special insight. You may or may not. But at the end of the day, many successful business people look back and say, man, I made this 1 or 2 critical decisions. And you might be at that moment right now. And worst case, you get some actual, concrete, unambiguous information about actual options. And you look around and say, I'm good. I don't need to change anything.
Yeah.
That is an awesome decision. Any decision based on reality and actual pathways is a good decision, right?
Yeah.
It was the best you could do. So
One other thing that I would add is I think for a business owner, we need to figure out how to get them to retire to something rather than retiring from something. If they don't
totally
have
agree.
something to pursue, something to chase, something to be ambitious about, likely this will be a traumatic experience for them. And so if we can build that into the process of taking them through and thinking through all of these things, I think their experience is going to be very different if they're excited about what they are pursuing, not what they're leaving. And I
Oh,
don't think we spend enough time on it, John. I don't know what your perspective is on that.
I think you're exactly right. And I definitely would say my most fulfilled clients were going to something else. And sometimes it was more of a retirement, but
Sure.
they clearly had something, a nonprofit, something with their faith, all types of things a sport, travel. And I think that's one of the good things about working with other advisors. Sometimes someone's financial planner advisor has been having these conversations with them for years. And
Yeah,
there's some goal or dream out there that they can finally go pursue.
yeah, for sure. All right, I want to open it up for some questions here. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your virtual hand, and we'll bring you on to ask your question. Um, Alan, you've seen a few transactions in your time. How's all this landing on you? What are your thoughts? What questions might you have for John?
I do have a question, but I'm gonna come at it from the opposite side.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
currently advising a family business. It's been in business 19 years. Small, medium-sized business, very successful. Being impacted dramatically by tariffs. They see an opportunity, and we've discussed it in my last meeting with them. Strategically, valuations are down in competing firms because of this. We think it's a good opportunity to make acquisitions. Have you
Yes.
represented clients on the buy side?
Absolutely. And it shows me in part why they're successful because they haven't lost their mind. They haven't, said the sky is falling. They're like, this could work out. So yes, absolutely. And yes, definitely. And by the way, I've heard both reactions to the sort of tariff discussion. The sky is falling, and then this could work out well. So
Yeah, I'll give them credit. At first, they said the sky's falling. We're going to do layoffs. We're going to retrench. And they stepped back and said, wait a minute, this is good competitive advantage. So,
yeah, definitely. That's exciting. Good for you, Alan.
One thing, Alan, that I hear there is the difference in time horizon. Someone that is looking at
Yes.
3 to 5 years is not making that is not probably making that bet. Maybe they are, I guess, but if you're looking at a family company that says we want to be generational, that's a generational decision. That's a generational bet that they can take. And I'm seeing families that have a longer time horizon be able to more comfortably lean into those long-term bets. I don't know if any thoughts on that.
yeah, in this particular case, the owners are probably looking to sell in 7 years and look at this as an opportunity to be accretive. And in 7 years, build a higher multiple for their exit. So,
Well, and to that point, Alan, and it may not be necessary at all, but that's also sounds like a situation where if they wanted to share the risk with a capital partner, somebody who would sort of write a check alongside them, that they could certainly do that too. But yes, yeah, because there other investors will have the exact same reaction. They'll just need someone with expertise in the space
Yeah, the operators.
to execute. Yeah. So
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Alan. I knew you'd have a good a good one.
working on it this morning. So, anyway.
yes, that's very
Top of
timely.
mind. All right. Any other questions from the audience today? Mark or Josh or Roberto, what's on your mind? You don't always get a chance to sit with John, so this is your chance. Dennis, what are your thoughts? You have any questions on any of this? I love putting people on the spot, John. Well, I'm going to take the mic back then. If we're shy, I'm going to take it back. John, this one's a more personal question. You and I met at the Langston Wealth Management Center conference at McCombs. You and your wife made that gift to the Wealth Management Center. You've helped provide resources to over 40 Langston Fellows. Can you just talk about the evolution of your own giving and why, how did you end up doing that? Start with the Langston Fellows and then tell us a little bit about the center.
Yeah, so long story short, when I originally started our investment banking firm, our only clients were the wealth and asset management world. And so about 4 years ago or so, I met the founder at the university, Dr. Ramesh Rao, and we met for breakfast tacos in Austin, Texas. He's now made this a semi-famous story. And I was so excited because my wife and I felt like we had been so fortunate to have some finances from the industry, from working with so many great firms and helping them accomplish goals and do different things, acquisitions or sales or raise capital, that we wanted to give back. And we particularly enjoy working with young people. It's just something we both, from a young age, have always enjoyed. We've been involved in different things over the years. And so we thought, wow, here's the fifth largest university in the country, starting a wealth management center inside the business school that's quite unique nationwide to give it the highest level of rigor, the highest quality students. And so that was all exciting. And so I was talking to Dr. Rao, and I said, look, how could my wife and I help the program the most? And he said, well, John, we have students from all over the world here, and many of them don't come from strong economic backgrounds at all. If you offered a scholarship program for high-performing students who chose wealth management as a minor, that would really help us. That's what sounds like a great idea to me. And so I went to call my wife. It's part of the truth here is I thought she would save me from my own idea. And what you won't know is that, and I'll tell you now, but my wife and I are a blended family, and I brought 4 children and she brought 4 children. So I'm calling her to say, hey, let's do this scholarship for college students. And she's going to say, have you forgotten like all the students we have to put through college? And so, but I call her up and she says, this is a great idea, right? And so that started the Langston Fellowship. We didn't really appreciate or understand, maybe is a better word, what was going to happen. And so we got involved with the students. We bring them to New York. We go to Austin. We do Zooms. We do all kinds of things. And things just kept growing. Our firm kept growing. We had a big economic event in the firm. And I was talking to Dr. Rao, and no one had endowed the center. And he had told me the very first time we talked was breakfast tacos. He's like, you ought to name the center. I'm like, slow down. I'm young. I've got kids, and we're younger firms. I appreciate your enthusiasm. He's like, well, you just have so much excitement and passion for this. You'll be the perfect person. I'm like, well, okay, let's work on this. But so last year, we had the opportunity to endow the center. And for us, we just felt it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to make an investment in, a wonderful established institutions, specifically focus on investing in young people. And what we're trying to convey to them is the idea that, wealth is, first, having the health. We don't talk about that enough, but that's the new wealth, as they say, having the resources, which are partly economic, right? But then also having a purpose in your life. If you have those 3 things, and we try to tell the students, the purpose is something in part that you were born with, and it's outside of you, and it's for the betterment of others. And that could take all kinds of forms, right? It could be in industry, it could be in civic service. And so we're trying to get that message across to them that that's what really wealth is. If you have those 3 things, and our hope is that we imbue a whole generation of young students with, yes, a desire to be successful in business, yes, a desire around finances, but that they're consciously thinking about people first, that my service to people, fulfilling my life's purpose, which is in part to help others, is a big part of this whole picture. And I always feel that people should be free to do, generally speaking, what they want with their wealth, but I certainly want to influence them to do good with it. And so it's been super rewarding for us. It was kind of funny because the administration, when we were doing all this, and this is all new for my wife and I, and we wanted to name it after our company, but state law will not allow you to do that, as I learned. So that was awkward. But in terms of, they're like, well, it has to be your name. We're like, there's no other option. They're like, nope. But the funny thing was, we were having this meeting and they were asking us, well, what is it you want? We're like, well, we don't have a list. We just want to invest in the students. And they told us a story about one of the giving officers had been at a different university in the past, and his request was that the students be required to wear the alma mater socks to every certain event. I'm like, okay. So the other thing that was funny about the meeting, if you know Austin, Texas at all, it's grown tremendously. So parking is a nightmare. And then now that the football team has done so well, football tickets are hard to come by. And in that meeting, they're like, please don't ask us for parking. That's the one thing we cannot give you. So it was, anyways. But this is sort of this little backstory. But we did it to give back, to invest in young people, and hopefully make a positive impact. And we're having a wonderful time. Super thankful for the opportunity.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're influencing the future influencers of the world. I mean, if these young people become investment advisors, investment bankers, they are now going to influence,
Wow.
tens of hundreds of families that hopefully will take some of those philosophies and will incorporate those into what they're doing. So I think the ripple effect that you'll see from the Langston Fellows and from the center is going to be huge. So I appreciate your courage and commitment to doing that. Um,
Thank you. We like to say this. I mean, just quickly, the bottom line, if you have success in life, I think you should have gratitude. We describe it in two ways. My dad has always said, if you see a turtle on a fence post, you know it didn't get there on its own.
yeah,
I'm sure that's not original. The other one I like to say is that you can build a sailboat, but you can't make the wind.
yeah,
And so we should all build the best sailboat that we can in our lives, whatever that means, but we should be thankful for the win, because we didn't make it and you can't create it. And when it comes, have gratitude and then try to do something good with it. So
absolutely. We do have one hand. Samantha, do you want to
hi,
come
Samantha.
on and ask your question?
Yes. Hi everyone. So my name's Samantha. I'm a 25-year-old young woman, and I am in the process of starting my own business. So I have a question for you, John.
Sure.
So I apologize if I missed this at all. I've kind of been multitasking here.
Um,
But what are the most important things to prepare for or anticipate when you're starting a business? Like, do you have like a list of 3 to 5 things that you can think of? Like in terms of
yeah.
what to be concerned for or look out for when you're starting a business?
Sure. I'll offer some thoughts, and honestly, Samantha, there's got to be lots of better ideas than what I'm going to say, but I'm going to tell you what I've ended up focusing on over the years. Okay.
Okay.
So first, I try to be, and this is going to sound funny, but we live in a different world now. I try to be very focused on really challenging myself and carefully thinking through what I expect my revenue to be and how I'm going to get that revenue. Occasionally, I've met a person starting a new business, and just in a few minutes of talking about what they might sell the service or product for, and how many they might sell per week or month and things like that, it's kind of become obvious even to them that maybe I've overestimated the potential of this business. Now that's just a super simple observation, but you'd be surprised the times that has occurred. And for what it's worth, I think if you were constantly focusing yourself on the idea that I've got to create some value for somebody for the revenue, I think you'll do well. We live in an age where some companies can be successful without meaningful revenue or profit for a period of time. But while those are extraordinarily rare, they're talked about a lot. So I think sometimes people, maybe as a younger person, have this impression that that's less important. I would say 95% of the time, it's critical that you figure out how much can I make, how often can I do this, and are people willing to pay for it? Just an intense focus on revenue. In the beginning of your business, you don't have enough opportunities. Later on, Dave and I were talking about this before the call. We're getting so many opportunities. I'm trying to do a good job of prioritizing which ones we should focus on, and that ends up sometimes at least having a revenue filter, right? So I would say concentrate hard on that. I would say, at the end of the day, expect some people to love your idea, and I mean friends and family, by the way, and some to think it's a terrible idea. Honestly, anytime someone, if everyone loves the idea, I always get a little bit nervous because I feel like, why hasn't someone already done this if everyone loves the idea? And then secondly, I would say really concentrate on, the problem you're solving, or why is it that someone's going to be excited for your service. Again, sometimes you start really thinking about that and you realize, what, this is not that critical or important enough to get them to pay. And as I said, there's probably a list of 100 things, Samantha, honestly, you should be thinking about. That's what's overwhelming. But I think if you give a lot of thought carefully and challenge yourself on how will I make money? What will the revenue actually be? How much is this helping a person? And then finally, I would say, people talk about this all the time, but when you're in a small company and starting, every person, it's like if you imagine a canoe. I don't know if you've ever been in a canoe, but a canoe is easy to tip over. And in a small company, every time you put a new person in, they can have a dramatic impact on that canoe tipping over or whatever. So try to be as careful as you can. That said, you probably don't have a year to do research to find the perfect person. But I'd say those 3 things. What's my revenue? Very focused on that. What's the problem I'm solving? And then, making sure when I bring people on, they at least have a great attitude. You can solve a lot of problems with a good attitude. So
Let me add a couple, Samantha.
please.
If Peter Drucker were sitting here with us today, he would say, your job is to create a customer. You may think you're building a product, but what you're really doing is you're creating a customer.
I
So
love it.
that's number one. If you can find someone that wants to pay you, whether it's for your service or for your thing, then you're on the right track. And then the second one is he talked about this systematic abandonment, which basically means a way of looking at your business and deciding what you're going to strategically stop doing. So it's easy for us as business owners to add things. We get all these ideas and we add and we add and we add. And what we don't do is we don't systematically stop doing things that are taking our time, our attention, and our resources. So
That's
as your
good.
business ideas evolve, have the courage to abandon things along the way, even some things that have worked in the past that maybe were the thing that got the thing started. Again, this is not easy, but again, this is from Peter Drucker. So he saw a lot of businesses in his time. Great
That's
question,
great, Dave.
Samantha.
Thank you.
And good luck in your business venture.
Thank you. Thank you both
It's not
so
going to be
much.
not going to be a straight path to success, but your courage and your commitment will get you there.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have one more minute. Any final questions before we close? All right. John, the hour
Thanks,
has
everybody.
flown. I really appreciate you making time. Thanks for
pleasure.
joining us on Authors at Drucker. Just a couple housekeeping items here at the end. Next up on Authors at Drucker, I'll have the opportunity to interview Mark Inglesian, the author of Stakeholders, the intersection of human beings in the ecosystem of business. I hope you'll join me for that conversation. And again, thanks for investing your time with us today. And John, again, thanks so much.
Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Dave.
All right. Take care.